A world-famous author, known for creating a super-logical detective, publicly vouched for the authenticity of photographs showing tiny winged fairies. For more than 4 decades, leading scientists accepted a skillfully altered ape jaw paired with a human skull as a crucial piece of the human evolutionary puzzle. Prominent news publication invested millions for what they thought were the personal diaries of Adolf Hitler, only to find out they were elaborate forgeries. Imagine a celebrated Stone Age tribe, hailed as a glimpse into our ancient origins, whose members were later discovered to sometimes wear modern clothes when not in the spotlight. Number 8. The tribe that time forgot, or did it? In the early 1970s, the world heard about the Tasaday. They were described as a small group of people living in total isolation in the dense rainforests of Mindanao, an island in the Philippines. The story was incredible. They were supposedly a Stone Age tribe, untouched by modern civilization. They used stone tools, wore leaves for clothes, and lived in caves. They knew nothing of farming, war, or even the world beyond their tiny patch of jungle. The media went wild. Here was a living window into humanity's distant past. Manuel Elizalde Jr., a wealthy Filipino politician and government minister, was the one who introduced the Tasaday to the world. He said he had made contact with them and became their protector, controlled all access to the tribe, allowing only carefully selected journalists, anthropologists, and filmmakers to visit. These visitors were flown in by helicopter, spent a short chaperoned time with the Tasaday, and came away with amazing stories and pictures. The Tasaday seemed gentle, peaceful, and almost childlike. They ate wild yams, tadpoles, and fruits. National Geographic featured them on its cover, and a book about them became a bestseller. For many, the Tasaday were proof of a purer, simpler way of life. Elizalde portrayed himself as their guardian, shielding them from the corrupting influences of the outside world. He set up a 20,000-hectare reserve around their supposed ancestral lands, and entry was strictly forbidden without his permission. This also meant that independent verification of the claims about the Tasaday was very difficult. Some anthropologists raised questions early on. Why were their stone tools so crude even for a Stone Age culture? Why did they speak a language that seemed related to existing local dialects, suggesting they hadn't been isolated for thousands of years? But these doubts were often overshadowed by the romantic appeal of the story and Elizalde's powerful position. Then, in 1986, things changed. The regime of Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos, Elizalde's patron, fell. Elizalde himself fled the country, reportedly taking millions of dollars from a foundation set up for the Tasaday. With Elizalde gone, journalists and researchers could finally access the area freely. What they found was startling. A Swiss journalist, Oswald Eaton, and a Filipino reporter, Joey Lozano, ventured into the Tasaday region. They found the people who had been portrayed as the Tasaday living in regular houses, wearing t-shirts and jeans and speaking local dialects fluently. Caves where they had supposedly lived for centuries appeared to have been recently occupied for show. Some of the Tasaday themselves spoke out. They said they were ordinary local farmers who had been persuaded by Elizalde to pose as Stone Age cave dwellers. They were told to wear leaves, use stone tools, and act primitive when visitors were around. In return, they received food, protection, and sometimes money. They claimed Elizalde had coached them on what to say and do. The story of the gentle, isolated tribe began to look like an elaborate performance. The controversy exploded. Was the entire Tasaday discovery a hoax? Some anthropologists who had initially studied them defended their findings, suggesting the Tasaday had simply adapted to modern life very quickly after Elazar left, or that the ones speaking out were not the real Tasaday. Others argued it was a clear case of deception, orchestrated by Elazar for fame, fortune, or political gain. The debate became heated, with accusations flying back and forth. Truth remained murky for some, as different individuals from the group told conflicting stories over the years. Some continued to maintain they had lived in isolation, while others admitted to the charade. Tasaday's story became a cautionary tale about how easily images and narratives can be manipulated, and how much people want to believe in the extraordinary, sometimes even when the evidence points elsewhere. Number 7. The Little Green Men Who Weren't, but caused big panic anyway. It was the night before Halloween in 1938. Many Americans were gathered around their radios, listening to their favorite evening programs. Suddenly, a regular music program was interrupted by a news bulletin. It reported strange explosions on Mars. Then, more bulletins came in, each more alarming than the last. A meteor had supposedly crashed in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. But it wasn't a meteor. It was a metallic cylinder. And something was coming out of it. The voice on the radio belonged to Orson Welles, a young actor and director, and his Mercury Theater on the air. They were performing a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells's science fiction novel, The War of the Worlds. The script was cleverly written to sound like a real news broadcast, complete with, on the spot, reporters' expert interviews and military updates. As the drama unfolded, Martians with heat rays emerged from their cylinders and began attacking, overwhelming the army and spreading panic. The reporters described scenes of chaos, destruction, and people fleeing for their lives. They announced that Martian war machines were advancing on New York City. Many listeners who tuned in late or who missed the initial announcement that it was a play believed what they were hearing was real. They thought America was actually being invaded by Martians. Phone lines lit up as people called newspapers, police stations, and radio stations, desperate for information or to report what they were seeing or hearing. Some people packed their bags and fled their homes. There were accounts of families huddling together in fear, others loading shotguns, and some even claiming they could smell poison gas or see the flashes of Martian weapons in the distance. The level of panic varied across the country, and it wasn't as widespread as some newspapers later claimed, but it was definitely real for a significant number of people. The next day, newspapers were filled with stories of the panic broadcast. Headlines screamed about the terror that had gripped the nation. Orson Welles himself expressed surprise at the reaction, saying he hadn't intended to deceive anyone. The program did include disclaimers stating it was a fictional dramatization, one at the beginning and others during the broadcast, but many people simply missed them or were too caught up in the realistic presentation. The format, mimicking live news reports, was highly effective, perhaps too effective. In the aftermath, there was a lot of discussion. How could so many people be fooled? Some blamed the radio station for its irresponsibility. Others criticized the listeners for their gullibility. Psychologists and sociologists studied the event, trying to understand the conditions that led to the panic. It was 1938, a time of great anxiety. The Great Depression was still ongoing, and war was looming in Europe. People were already on edge, perhaps more susceptible to believing in sudden catastrophic events. The radio was also a relatively new medium, and people trusted it as a source of immediate news. The War of the Worlds broadcast became a legendary event in media history. It demonstrated the incredible power of radio and the media in general to shape public perception and even incite mass behavior. While some historians argue that the extent of the panic was exaggerated by newspapers eager for a sensational story, there's no doubt that for a few terrifying hours, many Americans believed the unbelievable, that Martians had landed and were taking over the Earth. Orson Welles, far from being ruined, became even more famous. His genius for drama cemented in the public mind. The incident served as a stark reminder of how fine the line between fiction and reality can be, especially when delivered through a convincing medium. Number 6. The Mermaid, that was part monkey, part fish, and all hoax. In the 1840s, a strange creature went on display, captivating audiences in New York and London. It was called the Feejee Mermaid, and it was presented as the preserved body of a real mermaid caught in the Fiji Islands. People flocked to see it, their imaginations fired by centuries of myths and sailors' tales about beautiful women with fishtails. What they saw was a grotesque little thing, about 3 feet long, with the torso and head of a monkey sewn onto the tail of a fish. It was shriveled, dried, and undeniably bizarre. The mastermind behind the Feejee Mermaid's American fame was Phineas T. Barnum, the legendary showman who famously said, "There's a sucker born every minute," though there's debate if he actually coined that phrase. Barnum knew how to create a buzz. He didn't own the mermaid initially. It was brought to him by a man named Moses Kimball, a Boston museum owner. Kimball had acquired it from an English sea captain who had bought it from Japanese sailors. These kinds of mermaids were actually a traditional craft in Japan and East Asia, often made by fishermen for religious purposes, or as curiosities to sell to foreigners. They were constructed by stitching the upper body of a small mammal, like a monkey, to the lower body of a fish, then drying and preserving it. Barnum leased the mermaid from Kimball. He then launched a brilliant publicity campaign. He created woodcut illustrations of beautiful, alluring mermaids, nothing like the actual grotesque object, and distributed them widely. He sent anonymous letters to newspapers hinting at the existence of a real mermaid found by a Dr. J. Griffin, supposedly an English naturalist. This Dr. Griffin was, in fact, Barnum's associate, Levi Lyman, in disguise. Dr. Griffin would give lectures, vouching for the mermaid's authenticity and showing it off to influential people before the public exhibition. By the time the Feejee Mermaid went on display at Barnum's American Museum in New York City in 1842, public curiosity was at a fever pitch. People paid their 25 cents to enter and see the marvel. Many were undoubtedly disappointed by the hideous, shriveled creature they encountered, so different from the beautiful images Barnum had promoted. But the spectacle was still compelling. Was it real? Was it fake? The debate itself was part of the attraction. Naturalists quickly denounced it as a fabrication, pointing out the obvious stitching and the incompatibility of monkey and fish anatomy. But Barnum, ever the showman, used this controversy to his advantage. He would publish the skeptical views alongside eyewitness accounts or scientific endorsements he had manufactured. The more people talked about it, the more people wanted to see it. The Feejee Mermaid was a huge success for Barnum. It toured the country, drawing crowds wherever it went. It even traveled to London. It perfectly encapsulated Barnum's style of humbug and amusing deception that people almost enjoyed being part of. He wasn't necessarily trying to convince everyone it was real. He was selling the experience of wonder, curiosity, and the thrill of potentially being fooled. The mermaid itself was eventually lost, possibly destroyed, in one of the fires that plagued Barnum's museums. The Feejee Mermaid became an icon of hoaxes and sideshow attractions. It highlighted how easily people can be swayed by clever marketing and the desire to believe in the fantastical. Even when presented with something that looked obviously fake, the power of suggestion and the hype surrounding it could make people question their own eyes. It was a testament to Barnum's genius for publicity and his understanding of human psychology. He knew that sometimes people want to be tricked just a little bit, especially if it comes with a good story. Number 5. The Diaries of a Dictator That Fooled the World's Press. In April 1983, the German magazine Stern made a stunning announcement. It had discovered the secret personal diaries of Adolf Hitler. 60 small black-bound volumes supposedly written by Hitler himself between 1932 and 1945 had been found. The magazine claimed they had been rescued from a plane crash in East Germany in April 1945, hidden away for decades and now brought to light. The historical implications were enormous. These diaries could offer an unprecedented, intimate look into the mind of one of history's most monstrous figures. Stern trumpeted it as the scoop of the century. The magazine had paid a staggering 9.3 million Deutschmarks, equivalent to several million US dollars at the time, for the diaries and the rights to publish them. They brought in respected historians like Hugh Trevor Roper, Lord Dacre, from Britain, and Gerhard Weinberg from the United States to examine the documents. Initially, after a brief inspection, Trevor Roper declared them authentic. He was impressed by the sheer volume of material and the mundane details which seemed to lend them credibility. Other news organizations around the world, including the Sunday Times in Britain and Newsweek in the US, quickly bought syndication rights for hefty sums, eager to publish excerpts. The first installments were published in Stern on April 25, 1983, amidst a blaze of international publicity. However, doubts began to surface almost immediately. Journalists and historians questioned the provenance of the diaries. The story of their discovery was convoluted and involved shadowy figures. Experts in handwriting analysis and forensic science started to examine the documents more closely. They found numerous inconsistencies. For example, the paper, ink, and bindings used for the diaries were all found to have been manufactured after World War II, some as late as the 1950s. The glue contained modern chemical components. The initials on the cover of one volume were AH, but they were actually H in a Gothic script that was misread, a strange mistake for Hitler himself to make on his own diaries. Content of the diaries also raised red flags. They portrayed Hitler in a somewhat more moderate light than history records. For instance, the diaries suggested Hitler was unaware of the final solution or disapproved of the worst anti-Jewish excesses, which contradicted vast amounts of historical evidence. There were also factual errors, like incorrect military details. Within 2 weeks of the initial publication, the German Federal Archives, Bundesarchiv, conducted thorough forensic tests and declared unequivocally that the diaries were crude fakes. The ink used was modern, the paper was modern, and even the content was largely plagiarized from existing published works about Hitler with some added personal touches. The man behind the forgery was Konrad Kujow, a Stuttgart dealer in Nazi memorabilia with a talent for imitation. He had been producing and selling fake Hitler paintings and documents for years. He didn't just forge the handwriting. He physically aged the notebooks, tea staining the pages and even adding Hitler's supposed signature. The discovery story involving the plane crash was entirely fabricated to give the diaries a plausible pokos. Kujow had sold the diaries to a Stern journalist named Gerd Heidemann, who was obsessed with Nazi history. Heidemann, in turn, had convinced his editors at Stern of their authenticity, perhaps blinded by the potential scoop or too trusting of Kujow. Fallout was immense. Stern's reputation was severely damaged. Several top editors resigned. Hugh Trevor Roper, who had initially authenticated the diaries, had to publicly retract his endorsement, deeply embarrassing him. The media outlets that had paid for publication rights were left looking foolish. Konrad Kujow and Gerd Heidemann were both arrested, tried, and sentenced to prison for fraud. Cujo, an unrepentant character, even seemed to enjoy his notoriety. The Hitler Diaries hoax became a classic example of media sensationalism, wishful thinking, and the failure of due diligence. It served as a harsh lesson about the importance of skepticism and rigorous verification, especially when dealing with potentially explosive historical claims. The desire for a sensational story had overridden caution, leading to one of the biggest media blunders of the 20th century. Number 4. The chess machine. That hid a human secret. Imagine a machine, a mechanical marvel from the late 18th century that could play chess and win against skilled human opponents. This was the Turk, an automaton created by Hungarian inventor Wolfgang von Kempelen in 1770. It was a life-sized model of a human torso, dressed in Ottoman robes and a turban, seated at a wooden cabinet. On top of the cabinet was a chessboard. Kempelen would open various doors on the cabinet, revealing a complex array of gears, cogs, and clockwork mechanisms, seemingly proving it was all machine. Then, the Turk would come to life, its mechanical arm moving the chess pieces, its head turning, and its eyes following the game. Turk toured Europe and America for decades, baffling and amazing audiences. Played against famous figures including Napoleon Bonaparte and Benjamin Franklin, and it won most of its games. People were astounded. How could a machine possess such intelligence and skill in a game as complex as chess? Theories abounded. Some thought it was magnetism. Others believed it was some form of supernatural power, while a skeptical few suspected a hidden human operator. Kempelen and later owners of the Turk went to great lengths to dispel these suspicions, always showing the intricate machinery inside before each performance. The illusion was incredibly clever. Cabinet was designed with false compartments and sliding panels. When one set of doors was opened to show the machinery, a human chess master, usually small in stature, would be hidden in another section. As Kempelen moved around, opening different doors, the operator would shift their position within the cabinet, always remaining out of sight. The interior was ingeniously constructed to allow the hidden player to see the board from below, using magnets and threads, or later a system of lights and mirrors, and to operate the Turk's arm using a series of levers and pantographs. Clockwork sounds were often part of the misdirection created to enhance the illusion of a purely mechanical device. Several skilled chess players are known to have secretly operated the Turk over the years. They had to endure cramped, hot conditions inside the cabinet for hours at a time, all while playing high-level chess. It was a demanding job, requiring not only chess prowess, but also incredible discipline and the ability to remain silent and hidden. Despite numerous attempts by skeptics to expose the secret, the Turk maintained its mystery for over 80 years. People wrote pamphlets and articles trying to figure out how it worked, some coming close to the truth, but no one could definitively prove it until much later. The Turk's long career eventually came to an end in the 1850s. After its last owner, John Kearsley Mitchell, died, it was donated to the Chinese Museum in Philadelphia. In 1854, it was destroyed in a fire. It was only after its destruction that Dr. Silas Mitchell, son of the last owner, finally published a complete explanation of its secrets in a chess magazine, revealing how the human operator was concealed and controlled the machine. He explained that the illusion of the exposed clockwork was achieved by making it appear to fill the cabinet, while in reality it was confined to a small space, leaving ample room for the operator. Turk was more than just a clever magic trick. It was a phenomenon that sparked widespread debate about the nature of intelligence and the potential of machines. It captured the imagination of a public fascinated by the advancements of the Industrial Revolution. While it was a hoax, in the sense that it wasn't a true automaton. It was also a masterpiece of engineering and showmanship. Even Edgar Allan Poe wrote an essay attempting to debunk it. Malzel's chess player, correctly suspecting a hidden human, though he didn't get all the details of the mechanism right. Turk remains one of history's most elaborate and successful illusions, a testament to human ingenuity in both creation and deception. Number 3. The fairy photos that fooled a famous detective's creator. In 1917, in the village of Cottingley, England, two young cousins, Elsie Wright, 16, and Frances Griffiths, 9, claimed to have taken photographs of fairies in their garden. The first photo showed Frances behind a bush with 4 winged fairies dancing in front of her. A second photo showed Elsie sitting on the grass, offering her hand to a tiny winged gnome. These weren't blurry, indistinct images. The fairies, though small, were clearly visible. The girls said they often played with fairies and gnomes by the beck, stream, at the bottom of their garden. Elsie's mother, Polly Wright, was interested in theosophy and spiritualism movements that were popular at the time, especially with the backdrop of World War I and the many lives lost. She attended meetings of the Theosophical Society, and in 1919, she showed the fairy photographs to a prominent member. The photos eventually made their way to Edward Gardner, a leading figure in the Theosophical movement. Gardner was convinced of their authenticity and believed they were psychic phenomena made visible. He commissioned photographic experts to examine the original glass plate negatives. The experts concluded that the negatives showed no signs of manipulation, stating the plates are single exposure. These dancing figures are not made of paper, nor any fabric. They are not painted on a photographed background. But what gets me is that all these figures have moved during the exposure. The story reached Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the logical and rational detective Sherlock Holmes. Surprisingly, Conan Doyle, who had become a fervent believer in spiritualism after the death of his son in World War I, was also convinced by the photographs. He saw them as clear evidence of a hidden, spiritual world. In 1920, he wrote an article for the Strand magazine, the same magazine that published his Sherlock Holmes stories, titled Fairies Photographed, an epoch-making event featuring the images. He even commissioned the girls to take more fairy photos, sending them better cameras and plates. Elsie and Frances duly produced 3 more photographs in 1920, showing fairies offering posies, sunbathing, and in a fairy bower. Conan Doyle's endorsement gave the Cottingley fairies international fame. Many people, including other spiritualists, embraced the photos as proof of the supernatural. However, many others were deeply skeptical. Critics pointed out that the fairies looked suspiciously like the fashionable fairy illustrations found in children's books of the era, particularly those from Princess Mary's gift book. They also questioned why the fairies' hairflows and dresses seemed to reflect contemporary human fashion. Despite the skepticism, Conan Doyle remained a staunch defender of the photos' authenticity until his death in 1930. He wrote a book, The Coming of the Fairies, 1922, detailing the case and his belief in them. The controversy rumbled on for decades. Elsie and Frances stuck to their story, though they largely avoided publicity as adults. It wasn't until the early 1980s, more than 60 years after the photos were taken, that the truth finally came out. In a 1983 article in the magazine The Unexplained, Elsie and Frances, then elderly women, confessed that the fairies in 4 of the 5 photographs were, in fact, cardboard cutouts copied from a popular children's book, Princess Mary's gift book. Elsie, who had artistic talent and had worked in a photographer's studio, had drawn the fairies, and they had propped them up with hat pins. They said they had been too embarrassed to admit the prank once it got out of hand, especially with someone as famous as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believing them. Interestingly, Frances maintained until her death that the 5th photograph the fairy bower was genuine and that she really had seen fairies that day, though Elsie disputed this. The Cottingley Fairies hoax is a fascinating story about childhood imagination, the power of belief, and how even the most intelligent and accomplished people can be persuaded by something they deeply want to be true. The desire for a magical, unseen world, especially in a time of great loss and uncertainty, was a powerful force. The original cameras and some of the prints, along with Elsie's cutout fairies, are now museum pieces, remnants of a charming and remarkably enduring deception. Number 2. The missing link that was a deliberate deception. For over 40 years, a collection of fossil fragments known as Piltdown Man was celebrated by many in the scientific community as a crucial missing link in human evolution. It was discovered in a gravel pit in Piltdown, Sussex, England, between 1908 and 1912 by an amateur archaeologist named Charles Dawson. Dawson presented skull fragments, a piece of a jawbone with teeth, and some primitive tools to Arthur Smith Woodward, keeper of geology at the British Museum. The skull fragments appeared human-like, though unusually thick. The jawbone, however, looked distinctly ape-like, but the molar teeth had wear patterns similar to those of humans. This combination of a human-like cranium and an ape-like jaw was exactly what many scientists at the time expected to find in an early human ancestor. It supported the then popular theory that the human brain had developed first, before other ape-like features receded. Piltdown Man, or Eoanthropus dawsoni, Dawson's Dawn Man, was hailed as a major discovery, particularly in Britain, as it suggested that the earliest humans had originated in England, not Asia or Africa, as some other fossil finds were beginning to indicate. It brought prestige to British science. Over the next few years, more finds were reported from the same site, including a canine tooth that also seemed to fit the ape-human hybrid picture. Many prominent scientists in Britain and some internationally accepted Piltdown Man as genuine. Reconstructions of the skull were made, and it featured in textbooks and museum displays. However, from the beginning, there were skeptics. Some anatomists pointed out that the jaw and cranium didn't articulate well together. American and French paleontologists, in particular, were less convinced, noting that the jaw looked very much like that of a modern ape, possibly an orangutan, and the teeth wear seemed artificial. As more genuine hominid fossils were discovered in Africa and Asia during the 1920s and 1930s, like Australopithecus, Piltdown Man looked increasingly out of place in the evolving picture of human ancestry. These new finds showed that features like bipedalism evolved before large brains, the opposite of what Piltdown Man suggested. Despite the mounting inconsistencies, Piltdown Man remained an accepted fossil for many decades. The breakthrough in exposing the hoax came in the late 1940s and early 1950s, thanks to new dating techniques and more rigorous analysis. In 1949, Kenneth Oakley, a geologist at the British Museum, used fluorine content testing to date the bones. This test measures how much fluorine bones have absorbed from granulocyte over time. Oakley found that the Piltdown skull and jawbone were relatively young, perhaps only tens of thousands of years old, not the 500,000 years originally claimed. This raised serious doubts. Further intensive investigation was carried out in 1953 by Oakley, Wilfrid Le Gros Clark, and Joseph Weiner. Their findings were conclusive. Piltdown Man was a deliberate and elaborate fraud. Cranium was indeed human, but from a medieval or Roman-era individual, not ancient. The jawbone belonged to a modern orangutan. The teeth had been filed down to mimic human wear patterns. Both the skull and jaw had been artificially stained with chemicals like potassium dichromate and iron salts to make them look ancient and match the color of the gravels in which they were supposedly found. Even the primitive tools discovered at the site were found to be fakes artificially shaped and stained. The entire assemblage was a carefully constructed deception. The revelation of the Piltdown hoax in November 1953 caused a sensation and considerable embarrassment in the scientific world. Who was responsible? Charles Dawson, the original discoverer, was the prime suspect, as he was connected to all the finds. Some have suggested he acted alone, driven by a desire for fame and recognition. Others believe he may have had accomplices, possibly even figures within the scientific establishment who were keen to find a British ancestor. Various individuals have been implicated over the years, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who lived near Piltdown and was interested in fossils. But Dawson remains the most likely culprit. He died in 1916, long before the hoax was definitively exposed. Piltdown Man hoax had a significant, if temporary, impact on paleoanthropology. It misdirected research for decades, confusing the understanding of human evolution. It also served as a stark lesson about the importance of critical thinking, rigorous testing, and the potential for bias, like national pride, to influence scientific judgment. It remains one of the most infamous scientific hoaxes in history. Number 1. The 10-foot-tall stone man found buried in a field. In October 1869, on a farm in Cardiff, New York, owned by William Stubb Newell, workers, supposedly digging a well, made an astonishing discovery. They hit something hard, and as they dug further, they unearthed what appeared to be the petrified body of a giant man, over 10 feet tall. News of the Cardiff giant spread like wildfire. People were fascinated. Was it a petrified ancient human? Was it a statue from a lost civilization? Or was it, as some religious believers claimed, one of the giants mentioned in the Bible? There were giants in the earth in those days. Stubb Newell quickly capitalized on the find. He erected a tent over the giant and began charging admission for people to see it, first 25 cents, then 50 cents. Thousands of people flocked to Cardiff, eager to witness the marvel. Scientists, scholars, and clergy debated its origins. Some geologists and paleontologists were immediately skeptical, noting that petrified humans don't look like that, and the materials seemed to be gypsum, a soft stone that could be easily carved and wouldn't naturally survive petrification in that form. However, some other academics and many ordinary people were convinced it was genuine. The mystery and the sheer spectacle were irresistible. The fame of the Cardiff giant grew so much that the renowned showman P.T. Barnum offered Newell a large sum of money, reportedly $50,000 to $60,000, to purchase it for his museum. When Newell refused, Barnum, never one to miss an opportunity, simply had his own replica of the giant made. He then put his version on display in New York City, claiming his was the real Cardiff giant, and Newell's was a fake. This led to a bizarre situation where there were two Cardiff giants being exhibited, with people arguing over which was authentic. Barnum's move, while audacious, only added to the public's fascination with giant phenomena. The truth behind the Cardiff giant was eventually revealed. It was the brainchild of George Hull, a tobacconist from Binghamton, New York, and Stubb Newell's cousin. Hull, an atheist, had reportedly conceived the idea after an argument with a Methodist revivalist minister about the literal interpretation of the Bible, particularly the passages about giants. He decided to create a giant to fool people and demonstrate how easily they could be duped by religious claims. It was also a money-making scheme. Hull's plan was elaborate. In 1868, more than a year before the discovery, he traveled to Fort Dodge, Iowa, and purchased a 5-ton block of gypsum. He told the quarryman he was using it for a monument to Abraham Lincoln. He shipped the block to Chicago, where he hired a German stonecutter, Edward Sal, to secretly carve it into the shape of a giant man. Hull insisted on features that would make it look ancient and weathered, including staining it with acids and hammering it with darning needles embedded in a lead plate to simulate skin pores. Once completed, the giant was discreetly transported by rail and wagon to Newell's farm in Cardiff and buried. Hull and Newell waited nearly a year before arranging for its accidental discovery. As scientific scrutiny intensified and inconsistencies piled up, the hoax began to unravel. Paleontologist Othniel C. Marsh from Yale University examined the giant and publicly declared it of very recent origin and a decided humbug. Geologists confirmed it was carved gypsum. Eventually, under pressure and perhaps seeing more profit in revealing the truth, Hull began to confess selling his story to the press. The stonecutters also came forward. By early 1870, the Cardiff giant was widely acknowledged as a hoax. Despite being exposed, the Cardiff giant remained a popular curiosity. People were still interested in seeing the humbug that had fooled so many. It was sold and resold, exhibited in various places for decades. The original Cardiff giant is now on display at the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. The story of the Cardiff giant is a classic tale of American ingenuity, gullibility, and the public's enduring fascination with the strange and sensational. It highlights how a clever idea, combined with a good story and a receptive audience, can create a phenomenon even if it's built on a 10-foot lie.